This is a shir on Likutei Sichos, Chelek Chavtes, Sicha Vaeschanan, the second Sicha. From the pasuk in our parsha, which says, "V'nos elachas min ha'olim ha'el v'chay," that if somebody kills b'shogeg, somebody kills inadvertently, then he has to run to one of these cities, the cities of refuge, v'chay, and he will live. So from this, the Gemara learns out that Talmid Shegala, a student that is exiled because he needed to be sent to a city of refuge, Maglin Rabbi Imois, you send his teacher to be in exile with him. Shenemers, it says V'chai, that this person who's going to the city of refuge has to live. Ovidle midid tehevele chayusa, do what is needed that he should have life. And the Rambam expands on it. The Rambam says the halacha is that a Talmud that is exiled to a city of refuge, you send his teacher with him. As it says, V'chai, he must live. Do what is needed that he should live. And the Rambam adds, listen to what the Rambam adds. V'chaye ba'alei ha'chochma, the life of those that are people of wisdom, u'mevaksheh, and who seek wisdom. B'lei Talmud, without Talmud Torah, without study of Torah, kemisa chashuvim, it is like death. You get it? The lives of somebody who is a Baal Chochmah, who has Chochmah, and he seeks wisdom. Without that wisdom of Torah, it's like death. So what is the Rambam intending to tell us with this addition? So we could say that the Rambam is trying to answer a very simple question, which I'm sure you had, and to be quite honest, even after we explain the concept, it's still a little bit difficult to wrap your head around. This guy killed, unfortunately, inadvertently, but unfortunately a death occurred through him. And he has to go to a city of refuge. Why in the world does his teacher need to suffer along with him and get relocated to a place of, not where he usually lives, but to the place, a city of refuge? What did he do? Why are we sending the teacher there? Especially, we're talking here about a student who obviously did something wrong. Now, there's no, the murder here was not intentional. It's shogeg. But still, the fact of the matter that this could have happened via him means that he needs an atonement. That's why he's going to the city of refuge, is part of the atonement process, which means he's a Talmud, to use the language of the Gemara, she'eino hagun. He's a Talmud, he's a student who's not fully a person of integrity, a person of a good person. If that's the case, because we know there's a concept, wickedness comes out of those that are wicked. In other words, even if it's a subconsciousness, but the fact that something like this can happen through a person means that there's something lacking in his behavior. So why should his teacher need to be, because of that misdemeanor in the student, why should the teacher have to relocate and reshuffle his life? So that's why the Rambam says, because the life of those that seek and have wisdom without Torah is like death. In other words, it's not just that it's some kind of a additional luxury, or even something important for him. You would say that that this is an important item that he needs, and he's a studier of Torah, and therefore he has to be allowed to continue to study Torah. No, we're saying that this is life and death. For somebody who's a Torah studier, if he doesn't have Torah, literally, it's like he has death. So you need to keep him alive. Part of that lifeline that you give him is you send his teacher that can continue to teach him Torah, even in the city of refuge. In other words, it's not like, he needs a certain flavor of ice cream. You got to make sure he has it in the city of refuge. No, for that you don't need to inconvenience anybody. But you're inconveniencing his teacher, because for a person like that to be in a city of refuge without a teacher that's going to teach him Torah is like he's not alive. So in other words, it's critical. Where would the source for that be? The source would be what it says in Koheles. Shlomo Melech says that hachokma techaya ba'aleh. Wisdom brings life to the one who has it. In other words, wisdom is equitable with life. For somebody who's a person of wisdom, not having wisdom is the equivalent of not having life, God forbid. So that would be perhaps why the Rambam adds this concept that the life of a Talmud Chacham, without life of a student of Chachma, without Having a teacher is like death. So you got to keep him alive, so you got to send the teacher. Paragraph 2, L'chaira, this is very difficult to say this in the Rambam. According to that, so we would it should come out then that for what kind of student do you send a teacher? For somebody whose entire life is centered around Torah. And if you don't send the teacher, it's going to be as if he's deaf. But the halacha, the Rambam doesn't give any caveats like that. The Rambam says simply it's a halacha that applies across the board. Anybody who's a student of Chachma, his teacher has to be sent into exile with him. Now, one second. What kind of a student are we talking about? We're not necessarily talking about a very high-level student. On the contrary, the Gemara says, based on this concept, that if somebody is exiled, the student is exiled, you have to send his teacher with him. The Gemara says, this is a note to the teachers. Be careful who you teach. Don't teach somebody she'eino hagun, who's not acting fully properly, in order that his sins shouldn't bring him to the inadvertent death, which will lead him to need to be exiled to a city of refuge, which will mean that you as the teacher will also find yourself in the city of refuge. So be careful, be selective about who you take as your student. So if this guy, in other words, if we're looking at this being the fault of the student in some way, how can we say that we have to send a teacher there? In other words, how can we say that this person is at such a level where without Torah, it's like he doesn't have life? Now, although you may try and create a distinction here, and that is that we said a Talmud she'eino, maybe a Talmud that's not fully good is a Talmud that is into wisdom, but his deeds are simply not up to par. Says the Rebbe, it's difficult to say that. You know why? Because what we see in actuality is that when somebody is not acting fully appropriately, his diligence and his assiduousness and commitment to study Torah is also going to be lacking. Definitely, you can't say about such a student who is acting inappropriately, Talmud she'eino hagun, you can't say that always, because he's a student, he's always going to be at the level where wisdom is life for him. He could be an inappropriate student. And how can you make a blanket statement that for every student of wisdom, wisdom is as important as life? So now let's see, paragraph 3 says the Rebbe, this reason that the Rambam adds, the Logich of a Goin, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, great Goin, previous generation, the Rebbe had a relationship with and learning, he says, he writes somewhere that Zehu Tam Ruchni, that this reason that Rambam gives why you have to send a teacher because he needs life, and life is his wisdom. Wisdom is life. Torah is life. That says it's a spiritual. The Rogachev Goin says it's a spiritual reason, and he says another reason simply why you have to exile the teacher as well, because the fact that the student is somebody who could have this inadvertent death coming through him means he's an inappropriate student. And since you're not meant to learn with an inappropriate student, that means that the teacher was negligent in not fully casing out, not fully fleshing out, searching who the student was. So therefore he does get a residual effect from his negligence, inattentiveness in seeing who the student was before taking him on as a student. Says the Rebbe, that's difficult to say because what? Besides the fact that it's very difficult to understand the reason of the Rogachev, because according to what he's saying, would come out that the halacha that a Talmud, a student who is exiled, you exile the teacher with him, is only in a case that also the teacher is inappropriate because he didn't do his proper homework. In other words, he took somebody that's inappropriate and he taught him, and that creates a rebound on him that he's also inappropriate because he didn't check out the credentials of the student. And he learned with him consciously, even though he knew it's not a proper student. That narrows this halacha to a very limited case. The Rambam just says it across the board. Any student, you send his teacher with him. Not just if it's a student that's inappropriate and the teacher was inappropriate and so on. Besides that, says the Rebbe, interestingly, the Rebbe is a very great student and fan of the Rogachev Goin, but here he's saying that there's many other difficulties in the Pirush of the Rogat Shavagoin, which here is not the place to discuss it. But the main objection is the fact that the Rambam brings this reason in his book of Mishnah Torah, which is a book of halachas. From that, we need to say it's not just a tam ruchni, it's not just some kind of spiritual reason, but this also must be the halachic reason. The halachic reason that the Rambam spells out that Torah for a person of wisdom is life. And definitely, this concept cannot be in opposition, in contradiction to the clear halacha that it applies to every student. So you can't just say it's limited to students that are inappropriate. The teacher was therefore inappropriate. This doesn't work. This is across the board. A student needs wisdom. That's life. And you need to provide a teacher to give him that life of wisdom. So let's understand, though, why the Rambam adds that addition. So Yesh Leima says that, but we could answer that the explanation would be by first understanding the lashon of the Rambam. By the way, I just want to point out Ha'ara 25. The Rebbe points out that when we're casting aspersion, the Rogat Shavagon is casting aspersion on the teacher who teaches somebody who turns out to be inappropriate and saying, you didn't do your homework, you shouldn't have taught this student. The fact of the matter is that the Alter Rebbe, in the laws of Talmud Torah, in a Kuntres Achron, in the small writing down there, says that even when it's a student that's inappropriate, the student should definitely study for himself, because the Torah will bring him back to a good path, even at the beginning, it may be sinful to learn Torah if you're learning it with a very wrong reason. But even the teacher says that the Alter Rebbe says the teacher should also probably bring himself in, even for the sake of a doubt, even if there's just a hope that he can get the student back on the right track, even though right now he's inappropriate, he should probably enter that zone of suffix, of doubt, in order to try and get a chance to bring the student back to a good place. So how are we really blaming this teacher? He may have actually done what the Torah would have wanted him to do to try and get this student back on the right track. Why does he now have to land up spending time in the city of refuge? So, Beis Dalet, paragraph 4. We could say that the explanation is, first, let's understand that Rambam seems to have a very high benchmark. The Rambam says that Baalei Chochma Mevakshel, those that have wisdom and seek wisdom, their life without Torah is like death. Now, the pasuk that says that wisdom is equitable with life, that pasuk doesn't speak about seeking wisdom. It speaks just about wisdom. The wisdom brings life to its owner, to the one who has it. It doesn't say the wisdom and the one that seeks wisdom. Now, it's not just another word that Rambam adds, that Baalei HaChochma, those that have Chochma, the owners of Chochma, and Vakshel, those that seek. It's not just an addition in the word. This is an addition also in the meaning of the concept. Because when you talk about owners, those that have Chochma, Baalei Chochma, it means he learns Torah in a way that the Torah is retained by him as knowledge. He, so to speak, becomes the owner of that wisdom. So much so that when you truly ingest a concept, an intellectual concept of Torah into your brains, it becomes like you. That when you learn it in depth, it's like you own it. You truly absorb it. That's to be an owner, to possess Chochmah, to possess wisdom. When we talk about Mevakshel, to seek wisdom, that's a different level. That's not just possessing the wisdom, that's also delving in it, developing it further, moving up in the totem pole of deeper understanding in the wisdom that you're learning. The Torah is endless, and therefore, somebody who, Rambam says, if somebody serves Hashem from love, he's going to constantly be growing in it, delving in it. That's a very high level. So if the Rambam is using that double expression, those that possess wisdom and seek it, it seems to be talking about a very high level person. When can we say that a Talmid Chacham, somebody who has wisdom, needs to be provided with a Torah teacher because that's his life, it would seem to only apply to somebody not just that possesses Torah knowledge, but it also is somebody that advances in Torah knowledge through seeking and going from stage to stage. So that's a very small sliver of student, perhaps. Why does the Rambam add that? Does it say it in the pasuk? More than this, if we say that it's a very high-level student, so that would mean that we're limiting this law, that when do we send the teacher into exile with the student? Only when he's not just a possessor of wisdom, but he's also a seeker, a very high-level student. But it seems to be, however, the Gemara just says, blanket rule, any student that's exiled, we send his teacher. Is the Rambam making it a very exclusive kind of student? So the Rebbe says, no, I don't think so. It would appear to say that when the Rambam adds the word umevaksha and seekers, it's not an and. It's a or. In other words, the Rambam is talking about two kinds of people. Either somebody who possesses already wisdom, or somebody who's on the path, somebody who's at least a seeker. Didn't become yet a possessor of wisdom, but he's seeking wisdom. He went to a yeshiva, he went to a teacher to be taught, to get on the path of wisdom. We have a rule, yagata umatzata ta'amin. If somebody toils and says, I've persevered and I've found success in Torah, believe him. So if he's a seeker of Torah, he's going to become a possessor of Torah. Maybe now he's not yet. So it's not those that possess Torah and seek it, it's those that possess Torah or seek it. Now we understand why this applies to every single student. Because even a student who's inappropriate, who's not yet on the right path, not yet on the right, not yet, his deeds don't yet match where he wants to be, but he's a seeker. The fact that the teacher, and we have to assume that the teacher is an appropriate teacher, the teacher took him as a student. That's a proof that this teacher saw the potential within this student, that he feels the student is actually seeking. He's looking to become somebody who possesses wisdom. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a student of this teacher. So we're talking about a teacher, a proper teacher. And the teacher has taken him because he sees within him. And as we mentioned earlier, the teacher should, even on a doubt, try and see, is there potential in the student? So this opens it far wider. This opens this concept to anybody who's a student. That's why the halacha is you send along his teacher, because you have to be able to develop within the student the potential that the teacher saw in him in the first place by accepting him as a student. He should become a Talmud Hagon, he should become an appropriately active, his actions should be appropriate for a Talmud, and he should become somebody who possesses wisdom by being taught by his Rav. And we can add, says the Rebbe, this concept, do something that provides life to him, is not just in the first minutes that he's in this city of refuge. You could say maybe he's not yet at the level where wisdom is his life. But the city of refuge, the person has to sit there till the Kohen Gadol passes. It could be many years. So when you say that his teacher has to go with him, it's not just because right now, if he doesn't have his teacher, it's going to be like death. But because he's going to be a possessor of wisdom, he's on that trajectory, he's a seeker of wisdom, and now he's seeking, so now we have to provide him that lifeline to be able to progress, to become somebody who possesses wisdom, and as such, he will develop into a person, but without wisdom, he doesn't have life. So now we also have to treat him in that way, because he's on that path, and make sure to send the teacher there so he can continue the path to become fully possessive of wisdom, the wisdom of Torah. So that's basically, the Rabbi gave an explanation that the reason that Rambam says this lengthy explanation is because the Rambam is really expanding the halacha and saying the reason that this applies to every student, because it applies to those that possess wisdom and those that seek it. And anybody who's been accepted by a teacher to be a student means that the teacher must have seen within him this potential to be somebody who possesses wisdom. And in other words, wisdom is as important as life for him. And we send this teacher with him to carry on that process, to develop that process and bring the person to his full potential of life, of connection to Torah. Paragraph 6, one of the very simple and basic lessons we have from this is the greatness of Asay Lecha Rav. Fascinating how the Rebbe gives us this lesson. Generally, we talk about the importance of having a Rav, having a teacher, because we're all subjective. And a teacher is somebody we can turn to with objectivity, who can tell us the way it really is. We can't judge ourselves. Here the Rebbe is saying, this tells us the power of making sure that you're accepted by a Rav to be a student. When a person makes a true cheshbon, a true accounting of their personal stature, their personal spiritual state, he may discover he really could fit into the classification of being a Talmid she'eino hagun, a student who's inappropriate, not yet living up to his potential. And that could lead sometimes to a despondency, or a feeling of yish, a feeling of giving up. How am I going to ever climb out of this position of being inappropriate, not reaching my potential, and become a Talmud Hagan, become a appropriately active student, become a possessor of wisdom? So the answer is, make sure you have a good teacher. Because if you find a true Rav, a true teacher, so that it's clear that that Rav is going to continue to work with you and toil with you to make you into the kind of student you need to become. And however you feel right now, if you're a seeker and you seek a teacher, your Talmud, your teacher, will turn you into a proper student and somebody who becomes at the level of possessing wisdom. Even if right now you're at the level where your teacher's going to have to descend with you into the areas to pull you out, he's going to have to go to your level to work with you. It's like exile, but the halacha is that a Talmud, a student that's been exiled, his teacher goes with him. So if you have a teacher and you need him in your state of personal, spiritual exile, the incredible thing is that your teacher will be there for you. That's the halacha. Even if he has to come into exile with you. So that's a very, very strong plug in making sure to being truly a recipient and attached to a Rav, to a proper teacher, to a proper tzaddik, so that you will be worked with. And even if you are in a position of spiritual exile, your Rav will work with you to bring you up to the level of Chokhmah, of possessing the wisdom of Torah. Paragraph 7, we also have this in the spiritual service of Hashem, that we have parallels to this concept in each of us, the way we serve Hashem personally in our spiritual lives. How so? Every Yid is, compared to Hashem, is like a student. Like the pasuk says, "V'chol banayich limudei Hashem." All of your children, Hashem, are the limudei talmidei Hashem. They are the students of Hashem. So every Jew is like a student by Hashem, who's the Rav. When God forbid a Jew does a sin in opposition to Hashem, so at that moment, till he returns to Hashem and he's healed, he's like an inappropriate student. How can he do a sin? He can do a sin because he's not possessing wisdom. Generally speaking, we say that the basis for every sin is temporary craziness. Can you imagine a person is violating his connection with Hashem? Let's say a classic case, somebody sees something, God forbid, unkosher, and he's this great urge to eat this thing, and he eats it. It doesn't make any sense. A second later, he has no pleasure from it. He violated his connection to Hashem. Hashem said, don't eat, he ate it. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And you see it, sins are insanity. They just don't make sense. They're difficult because they pull at us and they challenge us and they entice us. But really, it's a moment of shtus, a moment of folly. And we know that the Alter Rebbe says that the Chokhmah is the first place where Hashem's presence comes into the person. So when Hashem's infinity, when Hashem's infinite light touches the person, it comes into his Chokhmah, and it spreads through the top point of his neshama, of Chokhmah, throughout his body. And when you are in a state of what we call Ba'alei Chokhmah, somebody who possesses wisdom, so what is felt in the Jew is a connection with Hashem. So you can't sin if you feel your connection to Hashem, that manifests in you through its attachment to Chachma. You possess Chachma. In other words, you possess an awareness of Hashem. You can't sin. Sin only comes when you have a temporary unawareness of Hashem. So where can you have sin from? Sin comes if you have a temporary absence of Chachma, of wisdom. And you don't feel the connection with your teacher, with Hashem. When you sin against Hashem, what is that? When somebody sins against Hashem, it means he's dealing with what's called the avenger of the blood, the one who's trying to kill you. Who's trying to kill us? We know who's in charge of killing. The angel of death. The angel of death is the same as the Satan, which is the same as the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And it works like this. The evil inclination comes and convinces you to a sin. The Satan comes and prosecutes against you in the heavenly court. And then the angel of death is sent to mete out the punishment, God forbid. So that is the person who we're up against, the evil inclination. He's trying to bring us, trying to kill us, trying to bring us to spiritual death. So now we have to run away from him. We have to go to city of refuge. But we're a student that doesn't have Chachma. Our wisdom, our connection to Hashem that expresses itself through Chachma is not prevalent, is not evident. So we need to have our teacher sent in with us. Who's our teacher? Spiritually, it means even though a Jew is in the active and open way, not possessive of wisdom at this time, his connection with Hashem is not open. But God forbid to say that means that his connection with Hashem is disrupted or uprooted. Because every Jew, no matter who he is, if he is not possessing Chachma, because to sin means you're not possessing the awareness and the wisdom and the connection to Hashem. But definitely every Jew is a member of Mevaksheha, for those who seek Hashem. Like we know that our sages have told, our Rabbeim have told us, it's in Hayom Yom, that a Yid neither wants or is able to separate himself from Hashem. So a Jew is always by definition a seeker of Hashem. Just could be that the connection and the seeking of Hashem is in a hidden way. By Rishonim, by wicked people, says the Alter Rebbe, by bad people, it's like their connection to Hashem is asleep. But it's still there. And it also at that time protects from the one who's seeking to do the vengeful killing, the Goyal Adam. And it doesn't allow this deep connection to Hashem that every Jew has in his neshama. It doesn't allow for spiritual death, God forbid. So the moment, though, that, as we said, the person shows he's a mevaksha, he's seeking Hashem, seeking wisdom. His teacher has to be sent in with him to provide that wisdom. That means that his chokhmah is sent in. He gets a revelation from his neshama and be exposed. That chokhmah can be exposed and be brought into his reality in a way that it gives him life. And that cancels out the control that the evil inclination has over him. So in other words, with the Rebbe is learning this halacha is that somebody who's running away to the city of refuge because he's lost his connection to Hashem and they're trying to kill him and he runs to the city of refuge. The fact that he did a sin and he has to run to the city of refuge is because his chokhmah was not apparent. So he's there now in the city of refuge. But we said if he possesses chokhmah, he doesn't possess chokhmah. But even if he's just a seeker of chokhmah, you have to send his teacher. Seeker of chokhmah, a seeker of connection to Hashem. Yes, every Jew is that. Even if he doesn't know, it's like it's asleep. But deep down, he's a seeker. We have to send him the chokhmah. We have to send him the vitality, which means the openness of his neshama, of the chokhmah, which is a connection with the Ein Sof, that he should be able to crawl out of being under the control of the Yetzer Hara. So that's in the individual service of Hashem. Now, says the Rebbe in paragraph 8, the same way it is by every individual Jew, same way we have when we talk about the collective, Klal Yisrael, the collective of the Jewish people. When Jews are in exile, especially in this final Golus, and even more detailed when we're talking about the darkness of the darkness, the doubled and doubled over darkness of the days just before Mashiach, the ikvus of the Mashiach, the footsteps of Mashiach. God forbid a person may fall into a depression. Let's say, where is my ayin yavoz view? Where's my salvation coming from? So the Torah says a clear halacha. The halacha is that a Talmud that is exiled, you send his teacher there with him. Now let's understand. Whatever Hashem tells us to do, it means because he's doing it himself. Right? Everybody says in his Bar Mitzvah Maimer that Magi Dvar Liyaka, which literally means Hashem tells us his words, he tells us his mitzvahs. The Medrash says there are some kings that they tell other people to do, they don't do it themselves. Hashem is exactly opposite. He tells us what he does. So if he's told us that if somebody's a Talmud and he goes into exile, city of refuge, you have to send his teacher, that means Hashem is also acting in that way. Which means that that's the basis of what our sages tell us, that wherever the Jews go into exile, the Shekhinah is with them. It says, V'shav Hashem lekech, Hashem will come back with. The Zohar says, wherever the Jewish people are. Ishtakach kutchabricha, ishtach manai begalusa, Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu is with them in the exile. And it says, Shuva banim erba meshurei seicha. Hashem makes, he says, Hashem says, come back, my children, I'll heal you. Means that Hashem transforms us by being with us into proper students. And then we go out of Golus, we go out of exile. More than that, our sages say that Maglin Rabbi Imai, the halacha is you exile the teacher with the student. Not you bring the teacher, but exile. Well, you know what that means? That means that the teacher has to be in that same place, that same difficult space where the student is. Because if the teacher remains aloof and outside, he's not going to be able to have a proper impact on the student. He needs to be in that very same place. And that language, Maglin Rabbi Imar, you have to exile the teacher with him, means that the teacher is in that same space, in those same straits, in that same difficulty, the golus and exile, where the student is. And that's why it says, B'chol tzarat ha'melot tzar, in all of their pain, he has pain. He's there in exile with them, so to speak. And so therefore there's no reason to give up, no reason to lose hope. God forbid. On the contrary, it's clear that notwithstanding the terrible situation of Golus, the awesome, terrible, horrible situation of being in exile, Hashem protects us. Hashem tzilcha, Hashem is like our shade, because he is, Al Yad Yaminecha is at our right side. Even more than that, since Hashem is here with us in the Golus, so even if looking and judging at the spiritual status of the Jewish people, we would come to the conclusion that maybe, God forbid, they're not yet ready to go out. But there's a pasuk that says Hashem has to do it for himself. Lamani, yes, I'll do it for myself, because Hashem is also here with us, so he wants to get out, so he can make it happen quicker. He can bring it for himself, so to speak. And he'll bring it in a way of Achishena, where Hashem says, I'll make it quicker, won't delay it even like an eye, like a blink of an eye. Hashem takes us out of the Golus, then takes out his children from the Golus and takes them together. We all go together to Mashiach, Tzidkenu, to the ultimate redemption. Miyad Mamish, now immediately. At the beginning of the Sikha, pointed out in the asterisk that this concept, talking about exile, we should know that this Shabbos is the Shabbos that blesses the 20th of Menachem Av. The 20th of Menachem Av is the day of Hilul, the day of passing of the Rebbe's father, Rav Agoin, Rav Chosid, Rav Mekubal, Rav Levi Yitzchak, who was exiled in Russia all the way to a little hick town in Kazakhstan because he was spreading Torah mitzvahs. The Soviets sent him, and he passed away in 1944 in the capital city of Almaty, of Kazakhstan, in Almaty, and that's where he was buried in a state of exile. Here we're talking about exile. There's a connection there. Thank you.